You can support us with the super thanks button below. How do authoritarian regimes fall? This question is the most important agenda of the world politics, especially in recent years in many countries. Populist politicians are becoming authoritarian. These leaders soon move away from democracy. It is very difficult to end the political career of these leaders who have moved away from democracy through elections. But how? The authoritarian leaders and their political careers. The latest news from Belarus provides an interesting example. We have conducted a comprehensive research on the subject. Let's start if you are ready. Authoritarian regimes are particularly strong in Eastern countries. In Eastern countries, democratic institutions are not strong enough and leaders are very important. This leads to leaders becoming authoritarian in a short period of time. Authoritarian regimes are very strong in countries like North Korea, China, Russia, and Belarus. The situation in Russia and Belarus is particularly similar. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has ruled Belarus since 1994. The Belarusian people do not support Lukashenko, but Lukashenko interferes in the elections and aims to maintain his power. The Belarusian people want to protest against Lukashenko, but Lukashenko is harshly suppressing these riots. He arrests protesters and gives them very harsh sentences. Moreover, he claims that the protesters are traitors. In this way, he is trying to get support from his orders. Lukashenko knows that he cannot stay in power forever because he is old and has lost his strength. The latest Belarusian media reports show that Lukashenko is in a bad situation. Lukashenko is a 68-year-old politician who has ruled his country for nearly 30 years. During this time, Lukashenko has become physically exhausted. Lukashenko is reportedly suffering from many health problems. Lukashenko's health problems were clearly visible when he attended a conference in Belarus. Before we talk about the details of Lukashenko's illness, there is something else we need to talk about. As you know, Putin is also allegedly suffering from health problems. Doctors are very clear about this. So what do Lukashenko and Putin have in common? These two leaders who have health problems have a lot in common. They have ruled their countries for many years. They are old. They have become authoritarian. But there is another reason for the allegations about their health problems. In democratic countries, the public is informed about the health status of the head of state. This is because the head of state can take many critical decisions for these decisions to be taken correctly. It is important that the head of state is healthy, but repressive leaders do not follow such democratic practices. That's why official statements about Lukashenko's and Putin's health are not convincing to anyone. Doctors and experts are closely following the schedules of these leaders and trying to monitor their state of health. Everyone is now sure that Putin is sick after the strangeness of his movements, especially his hand and foot movements, are quite strange. Lukashenko, on the other hand, is thought to be facing a similar illness. Lukashenko traveled to Moscow to attend Russia's victory celebrations. However, he suddenly disappeared during the ceremony. Lukashenko did not wait until the end of the program and was rushed out in the middle of it. It turned out that Lukashenko had difficulty walking while attending this program. The Belarusian leader also looked very exhausted at the moment of the ceremony. Putin and his fellow leaders had one thing to do. They were scheduled to lay flowers at a monument to a soldier about 300 meters from where they were sitting. Lukashenko did not go to lay flowers so as not to walk the short distance of 300 meters because Lukashenko was not healthy enough to walk. This event attracted everyone's attention. Everyone could see that Lukashenko was very exhausted. Dmitry Kusnets, a well-known Belarusian political analyst, shared an interesting fact about this. According to this information, a special dinner was organized for the leaders after the ceremony. However, Belarusian President Lukashenko did not attend this dinner. The Russian delegation was informed about Lukashenko's absence. The Belarusian government informed the Russian delegation that Lukashenko could not attend the dinner due to health problems. After this incident, it was thought that Lukashenko had a problem with his digestive system. However, Those who watched the footage of the ceremony realized that Lukash and Cos was facing a more serious health problem. Lukash and Cos had a bandage on his arm. His arm was tightly wrapped with his bandage. After this was noticed, Lukash and Cos' body was examined more carefully. During this process, something interesting was noticed. But there was a later. Lukash and Cos had makeup on his face. Lukash and Cos' face was covered with foundation. It is emphasized that there could be two reasons for this. First of all, Lukash and Cos' face may have been very pale. The makeup may have been intended to make Lukash and Cos look more vigorous. A professional makeup was applied to make Lukash and Cos' face brighter. The second possibility is more shocking. It is claimed that Lukash and Cos suffers from advanced diabetes, which is why he often faints. Lukash and Cos may have been hit in the face when he fainted. It is said that makeup was applied to hide the bruises on his face. In this way, no scars are visible on Lukash and Cos' face. The Belarusian government is not making any statement on this issue. This leads to more allegations being made. The people of Belarus are talking about these allegations, especially on social media platforms and Telegram groups. Thousands of people are talking about this issue. Everyone is wondering what exactly Lukash and Cos' health problem is. The people of Belarus are now waiting for an explanation. As you know, there is a huge tension in Belarus between the people and Lukash and Cos. Most of the Belarusian people hate Lukash and Cos after Lukash and Cos' interference in the election results. The anger of the Belarusian people grew even more. Belarusians think that Lukash and Cos' political career should end as soon as possible, but Belarusians do not know how Lukash and Cos' political career will end. Lukash and Cos' health problems have been a very interesting development for the Belarusian people because throughout the history of the world, the power of authoritarian leaders has usually added to the health problems. It is thought that Lukash and Cos will have to resign due to his health problems. Lukash and Cos is the first president of Belarus and he is still in office after the end of Lukash and Cos' political career. Belarus can democratize. Belarus could also become a country in line with Europe. Lukash and Cos, in collaboration with Putin, has led his country with anti-Western policies that Russia's policies may change after Lukash and Cos leaves office. This could completely change the political balance in Eastern Europe. It could lead to a major loss of power for Putin. There is some bad news. While the Ukrainians inside Soledar continue to hold their defense, Ukrainian flanks around Soledar have gradually been compromised. Russian attacks to the north and south of Soledar started out wide and distant from the city. But over the last 2 days they have been steadily closing in. Russian fire recently started to impede the Ukrainian rotation process, and it also allowed the Russians to open more lines of attack. Preserving control over the main defensive positions inside the city can rapidly become useless. And here is why. Last time I told you that while the Ukrainians have focused on the northern and southern parts of the settlement, the Russians have attacked them right in the center. It was unclear at first how the Russians managed to do it because the Ukrainians should have been controlling the eastern area previously. The fights have been consistently reported to happen on the Tolstoy and Chernyshevskaya streets, marking the presence of Ukrainian forces. The lack of updates from this region prompted most sources to assume that the Ukrainians quietly stepped back because even Russian sources assumed these positions without any claims of breaching Ukrainian defenses. This perfectly explains how the Russians managed to conduct an attack in the center. And this also means that the Ukrainians were not able to withstand the tempo of Russian advances. And today, the spokesperson for the Eastern Group of Forces explained how it happened. He said that almost all Wagner units had been relocated to storm Soledar, which made it the most intense area on the entire front, much more intense than even Bakhmut. He said that the Wagners had switched to using the tactics from the First World War, where they just tried to overwhelm the enemies with the sheer number of infantry. Some people have been skeptical about it because it is a private military company that cannot expand their professional personnel in this way. But this is where the rules of the game have recently changed because the head of the Wagner forces, Prigozhin, has recruited more than 40,000 Russian prisoners. These prisoners are obviously not professional fighters, and they are treated to a large extent as expendable resources. The prisoners are used by the professional forces as cannon fodder to overwhelm the Ukrainians and also find weak spots. Today, Ukrainian reserve officer and analyst described in detail how the Wagner's insulator actually work. They sent several small squads of prisoners, up to 8 people, to storm multiple targets along the perimeter of the city. Once the first wave is dead, they adjust the targets and send the second one. Once any group achieves success and reaches the target, the Wagners know that the prisoners have found a weak spot and finally deploy their professional units to develop the attack further. This is exactly how the Russians managed to get a toehold in the northern part of the city, which they still maintain because they deployed professional forces. And this is exactly how they managed to enter the central part of the city. Unfortunately, today's videos of fights suggest that the Wagners managed to develop their success inside the town. Such a dangerous development of the situation puts some Ukrainian units in Artem soil into a salient and forced them to retreat towards the salt mines. So the fights are once again happening near the entrances to the salt mines. One of the reasons why the Russians were able to conduct the attacks along the perimeter of the city in the first place is that the Ukrainians seem to have failed to protect their flanks. Several days ago, I told you about the imminent Russian attack on the Ukrainian flanks, concluding that the main focus of the Ukrainians likely needs to be reinforcing the flanks and making sure that the Russians cannot breach them. Even though the Russians failed to develop their offensive in Rostov as they initially planned, by constantly attacking other settlements on the line, they managed to immobilize Ukrainian troops in Krasnopol, Sili Station, Gora, and Horodnia. Russian sources even claimed that they have already entered the latter too. In these conditions, conducting rotation becomes risky as the Russians control some segments of the roads. As of now, the Ukrainians are still controlling the salt mines and high-rise buildings in Soldau, which are the main defense positions. And they also control everything west of the railways. If the Ukrainians manage to conduct a series of counterattacks and reduce Russian fire control over the region, then the Russians will lose the ability to send troops to Solder from every direction, and the Wagners will not be able to sustain their attack. If not, then controlling defensive positions in Solder becomes useless, as if the Russians are cutting too deep into the Ukrainian flanks. Many sources say that the next 24 hours are decisive, so we will see what the Ukrainian command decides to do. Russian leader Vladimir Putin was shaken by new news while thinking about how to compensate for the losses he suffered in the occupied territories. The news shared the other day also caused outrage in the Russian army. This news was the killing of General Dmitry Ulyanov, who served in the Russian army for many years and led many important operations. The Russian army was devastated by this loss. While Putin is losing one by one his generals, who are taking critical roles in occupied territories, the Ukrainian army continues to advance in the war. Let's evaluate the killing of General Dmitry Ulyanov and the successful offensive of the Ukrainian army together in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Sabotage groups and partisans are as effective as armies. The Russian army has lost many important figures due to assassinations and attacks by non-army groups. General Dmitry Ulyanov is one of them. Ulyanov was killed by a Ukrainian sabotage group tasked with preventing Russian invaders. Recently, a Ukrainian sabotage group organized an attack against the invaders, including Russian General Ulyanov. General Ulyanov and his entourage faced an unexpected attack in a non-combat zone in Donbass. When Ulyanov and the other invaders responded to the Ukrainian sabotage group, a clash broke out, but the Russian occupiers were caught off guard by this attack. The Ukrainian sabotage group killed General Ulyanov in this short clash. With this loss, Russia, according to its own sources, has lost a total of 11 generals since the beginning of the occupation. A highly respected paratrooper, General Ulyanov served in many important positions in the Russian army. One of these duties was to be the commander of the 98th Guards Airborne Division, a unit with origins in the Soviet Union. The airborne troops played a major role in the wars in which Russia took part. Ulyanov, who was also the Chief of Staff of the 7th Airborne Division and the commander of the 1141st Artillery Regiment, retired at the age of 44. General Ulyanov returned to the army when Russia began its occupation of Ukraine. Because Ulyanov was an occupying commander who adopted Putin's ideas, Ulyanov was appointed by Putin to head a regiment of TARs and motorized infantry serving in the occupied territories. Ulyanov's death caused a huge wound to the Russian army because he was one of the most important figures in the army. Ulyanov was one of the highest-ranking commanders killed. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has not received any news of generals' deaths in the last few months. According to Russian sources, the Russian army, which has lost 11 generals so far, suffered a major setback with the death of the 12th general. However, it is thought that the Russian army lost more generals during the invasion of Ukraine. This is because the Russian army underestimates the number of soldiers killed and ammunition lost. Despite the fact that the whole world knows this, Putin is trying to hide his losses through manipulation and lies. Ukrainian officials had announced that the Russian army had lost 14 generals during the occupation. With the death of General Ulyanov, this number came to the agenda again. Japanese commanders made striking statements about the death of Russian generals. Japan commented that Russia lost 20 generals during the invasion of Ukraine based on intelligence data obtained by Tokyo from Europe and the United States. Retired General Kiyofumi Iwata, former Chief of Staff of Japan's Ground Self-Defense Forces, told a Japanese newspaper that the Russian army's general losses are incredibly high. "I want to say that the high loss of generals in the Russian army is related to the strength of the Ukrainian troops in cyber warfare. Because Ukraine's cyber power could easily detect the location of the invading generals," Japanese General Iwata stated that the use of cell phones by the soldiers, despite the Russian army's ban, also facilitated the detection of the location. "The death of the general demoralizes the soldiers," Iwata concluded. In addition to what Japanese General Iwata said, the intelligence of the Ukrainian army also plays an important role in locating Russian generals. Ukrainian intelligence, with the help of Western and European countries, especially US intelligence, is able to obtain information about many regions and people. Thanks to this information, the Ukrainian army destroys bunkers and ammunition depots and military bases of the Russian invaders with pinpoint precision. Since the beginning of the war, the Ukrainian army has killed many top commanders of the Russian invaders. The commanders killed by Ukraine's successful operations as the Russian invaders to regress. Who were these commanders? How were they killed? Let's open the pages of the past together. One of the commanders lost by the Russian occupiers is Magom Toshev. Toshev was the right-hand man of the Russian puppet Chechen leader Kadyrov, appointed by Kadyrov as the commander of the 14th Mechanized Regiment in the occupied territory. Tasheyev was killed in a successful ambush by the Ukrainian army at Gostomel Airport near Kiev. The 14th Mechanized Regiment was of great importance for Chechen groups. Tyachev's death is a great loss for Chechens. Another occupation commander killed with a single bullet by the Ukrainian army was Major General Andrei Saukovetsky, deputy commander of the 41st United Army of the Central Military District. A Ukrainian sniper soldier killed the invader Sovetsky with a single bullet in a special operation. Major General Vitaly Gerasimov, one of Putin's most experienced commanders, was killed in fighting around Kharkov. Gerasimov was an experienced commander who fought in the occupation of Crimea and in Syria. The Ukrainian army achieved a great success by killing Gerasimov. Major General Anton Semyonov was killed in artillery strikes by the Ukrainian Air Force. With the help of Western and European countries, the Ukrainian army has considerably strengthened its ammunition stocks and missile artillery systems. The attacks in which Russia suffered great losses are usually carried out with missile and artillery systems. General Semenov was blown up in one of these attacks. The importance of Crimea in the Russian-Ukrainian war is also well known for this reason. Since the beginning of the war, fierce clashes have been taking place in Crimea and the regions close to Crimea. One of these regions is Mariupol. Major General Oleg Matveyev was killed by the Ukrainian army during one of these fierce clashes in Mariupol. The list goes on and on because the Ukrainian army, which is getting closer every day, is making history against the Russian invaders. Let's continue by naming other known casualties. 29th Army Commander Major General Andrei Kolesnikov, Lieutenant General Andrei Mordashov, 49th Division Commander, Lieutenant General Yakov Razumov, Major General Vladimir Frolov, Deputy Commander of the 8th Guards Army Major General Ken Amatsubatchev, Chief of Staff of the 29th Combined Arms Army, Major General Roman Kutuzov. Along with these names, dozens of high-ranking occupying soldiers, including many officers and commanders, were killed by the Ukrainian army's attacks. The Russian army also lost 49 colonels to Ukraine. One by one, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is losing his commanders who played an important role in the war. The Russian army is losing an average of 500 soldiers and thousands of tons of ammunition every day. The public also does not support Putin's decision to invade. Putin, who is full of failures all on his side, is causing his people to die for his own political career. The continuation of this turmoil raises the possibility of a civil war in Russia. Do you think the killing of the generals will change the course of the war? How will Putin compensate for those losses? How do you interpret the successful attacks of the Ukrainian army? If Putin does not give up his decision to invade, could a civil war break out in Russia?